My name is Jenna, and at 34 years old, I thought I had the perfect marriage. That December night when my doorbell rang at midnight, I was wrapping Christmas presents for my husband Mark, thinking about how blessed we were after 12 years together. My new neighbor Lisa had moved in 6 months ago, seemed friendly but distant. When I opened the door to find her standing there distressed and shaking, I never imagined the words she'd speak would shatter everything. Before I share what happened next, let me know where you're watching from. Please like and subscribe if you've ever discovered a betrayal that changed everything. Mark and I met during our junior year at the University of Michigan. We were both studying business paired together for a marketing project that required us to create a mock company from scratch. I remember the first time I really noticed him not just as another classmate, but as someone special. He was presenting our financial projections to the class, and when the professor pointed out a calculation error, Mark laughed at himself so genuinely that the whole room relaxed. That ability to not take himself too seriously while being incredibly smart was what drew me in. After college, we both landed jobs in Chicago. I started as a marketing coordinator at a tech startup, while Mark joined a financial consulting firm downtown. Those early years were magical in their simplicity. We'd meet for lunch at this tiny Vietnamese place halfway between our offices every Wednesday. The owner knew our orders by heart: pho for Mark spring rolls and vermicelli for me. Friday nights meant trying new restaurants. Saturday mornings meant running along Lake Michigan. And Sunday afternoons meant reading the Tribune in bed with too much coffee. We got married 7 years ago at my parents' house in Grand Rapids. Nothing fancy, just family and close friends in the backyard under string lights. My dad spent 3 days hanging perfectly. Mark cried when I walked down the makeshift aisle between my mother's rose bushes. His vows were simple but profound. He promised to always choose us, to never let the mundane overshadow the magical, and to love me through every season of change. I believed every word. By year 10 of our relationship, we'd settled into comfortable routines. I'd been promoted to marketing director at my company, managing a team of 12 and handling million-dollar campaigns. Mark had become a senior consultant specializing in healthcare sector finances. We bought a beautiful Tudor-style house in Oak Park with the wraparound porch I'd always dreamed of and the home office Mark needed. Life felt stable, secure, like we'd built something solid together. Our mornings had a rhythm. Mark would wake up first at 5:45, start the coffee, and read the news on his iPad. I'd join him at 6:15, and we'd sit together for exactly 20 minutes before getting ready for work. He took his coffee black with 1 sugar. I preferred mine with oat milk and cinnamon. These details mattered because they showed how well we knew each other, or so I thought. Thursday nights were sacred, our standing date night since year 3 of marriage. We'd take turns choosing the activity. Mark usually picked jazz clubs or wine bars. I preferred trying new restaurants or seeing independent films at the Music Box Theater. We never missed a Thursday unless one of us was traveling for work, which happened rarely. At least I thought it was rare. The changes started subtly last spring. Mark's company announced a restructuring, and he was promoted to partner track. With it came longer hours, weekend strategy sessions, and quarterly reviews that required overnight trips to Detroit, Milwaukee, and Indianapolis. I was thrilled for him. We celebrated with champagne at Gibson's, toasting to his success and our future. He seemed happy, but also stressed, which I attributed to the new responsibilities. Then came the gym membership in June. Mark had never been particularly athletic beyond our weekend runs, but suddenly he was obsessed with CrossFit. 5:30 morning classes, protein shakes in our kitchen, new athletic wear arriving from Amazon every week. When I teased him about his midlife crisis starting early, he laughed it off, saying the partners at work had gotten him into it. Something about team building through suffering together. It made sense at the time. His wardrobe underwent a complete transformation too. The comfortable polos and khakis I'd known for years were replaced with fitted shirts, designer jeans, and a collection of cologne that took over his side of the bathroom counter. He started getting his hair cut every 2 weeks instead of monthly, switched to a trendy barbershop downtown that cost $70 per cut. When I mentioned the expense, he reminded me about his raise and said he needed to look the part now. Lisa moved into the house next door in early July. The previous owners, an elderly couple we'd known for 5 years, had relocated to Florida. The first time I saw her, she was directing movers while wearing yoga pants and an oversized Northwestern University sweatshirt. She had that effortless beauty some women possess where messy hair and no makeup somehow looked intentional and chic. Early 30s, I guessed, with the confidence of someone who'd figured out who they were. Our first real interaction happened when she knocked on our door the following Saturday, holding an empty measuring cup and wearing an apologetic smile. She was attempting to bake her grandmother's banana bread as a housewarming gift for herself, but had miscalculated her sugar supply. I invited her in while I filled her cup, and we chatted briefly about the neighborhood. She was a freelance graphic designer, worked from home, had moved from Lincoln Park because she wanted actual space and a garden. Her laugh was distinctive, a genuine burst of joy that made you want to laugh along. Mark came downstairs during that first meeting, fresh from his shower after CrossFit. I watched Lisa's eyes track him as he entered the kitchen, saw the slight flush in her cheeks when he extended his hand to introduce himself. At the time, I felt a tiny spark of pride. My husband was handsome, successful, charming. Of course, women noticed him. It meant I'd chosen well, won the prize. God, I was such a fool. Over the next few weeks, Lisa became a peripheral part of our lives. We'd wave when getting mail, she'd accept packages for us when we weren't home, and Mark helped her move a heavy desk upstairs one evening when I was working late. She brought us cookies as a thank you snickerdoodles that were actually quite good. We invited her to our 4th of July barbecue, where she mingled easily with our friends, winning everyone over with her stories about nightmare clients and dating disasters. The first red flag I genuinely dismissed happened in September. Mark offered to help Lisa with her lawnmower that wouldn't start. What should have been a 20-minute fix turned into 3 hours. When he finally came home, he was covered in grass stains and laughing about how they'd had to completely disassemble the thing before finding a tiny stick lodged in the blade. They'd celebrated fixing it with beers on her back deck. Just neighborly friendliness, nothing more. October brought more overnight trips for Mark. The quarterly reviews he'd mentioned were apparently intensive 3-day affairs, where all the partners gathered to analyze every account. He'd leave Wednesday afternoon and return Friday night exhausted but exhilarated by the strategic planning. His excitement about work was infectious. We'd spend Saturday mornings in bed while he told me about expansion plans and new client acquisitions, his eyes bright with ambition. There was one week where his trip overlapped with Lisa having the flu. I brought her soup and medication, sat with her for an hour while she dozed on her couch. She was grateful to the point of tears, said she hadn't had anyone take care of her like that since leaving home. When Mark returned and heard about it, he suggested we should both check on her more often. She was alone in a new neighborhood after all. It was the decent thing to do. Thanksgiving was when things shifted in a way I should have noticed. We hosted dinner for both our families, 23 people crowded around our extended dining table. Lisa was supposed to fly home to Oregon, but her flight was canceled due to weather. Mark insisted we invite her rather than let her spend the holiday alone. She arrived with 2 bottles of excellent wine and charmed my difficult mother-in-law within minutes. Halfway through dinner, Mark disappeared. After 20 minutes, I went looking and found his car gone. He returned an hour later with a story about Lisa's oven timer going off, her pie burning, and him helping her deal with the smoke alarm and mess. Everyone laughed about it, teased Lisa about her cooking skills, and the moment passed. But I remembered the look on her face when he walked back in a mixture of gratitude and something else I couldn't quite identify. December arrived with unusual warmth for Chicago, barely any snow, and temperatures in the 40s. Mark and I had plans to celebrate our anniversary on the 20th with a trip to Maui. I'd booked everything in September, using points we'd saved for 3 years. First-class flights and oceanfront suite at the Grand Wailea Couples Massage Sunset Sailing. It was going to be perfect, a reconnection after his busy year. But Mark seemed distracted whenever I mentioned the trip. He'd smile and nod, but immediately change the subject. When I showed him the snorkeling tour options, he barely glanced at them before saying whatever I chose would be fine. This from the man who usually researched every restaurant within a 5-mile radius of any hotel we stayed at. I told myself he was stressed about year-end reports and would relax once we were actually on the beach. The week before that midnight knock, I'd been Christmas shopping downtown. Walking through Macy's, I spotted Mark's colleague Tom having coffee in the food court. We chatted briefly, and I mentioned how proud I was of Mark for managing all these quarterly reviews on top of his regular workload. Tom looked confused, said there hadn't been any quarterly reviews since August, just the regular monthly meetings that were done via video call. The moment passed quickly as Tom excused himself for another appointment, but the seed of doubt was planted. That night, I almost confronted Mark. He was in his office door closed on what he said was a client call. Through the door, I could hear his voice lower and softer than his professional tone. When he emerged an hour later, he seemed lighter, happier. He pulled me into a spontaneous dance in our kitchen, spinning me around while humming some jazz standard. For those few minutes, we felt like us again, and I pushed my suspicions away. 2 nights before the knock, Mark said he had to fly to Detroit for an emergency client meeting. A hospital system was threatening to drop their contract, and he was the only one who could save it. He packed quickly, kissed me goodbye with unusual intensity, and promised to be back in time for our anniversary trip. I spent that evening wrapping his Christmas presents, including a vintage watch he'd admired months ago that cost more than I should have spent. The next day, Lisa and I happened to leave for work at the same time. She looked tired, said she'd been up late finishing a project. There was something off about her energy, a nervousness I hadn't seen before. When I asked if everything was okay, she hugged me suddenly and tightly, whispering that I was a good person who deserved good things. It was odd enough that I thought about it several times throughout my workday. That evening, I tried calling Mark to say goodnight, but his phone went straight to voicemail. The hotel where he claimed to be staying had no record of his reservation when I called to leave a message. I told myself there must be a mix-up, maybe his secretary booked under the company name. The rationalization came so easily, a protective mechanism I didn't even realize I was employing. The doorbell at midnight was jarring wrong. Nobody rings doorbells at midnight unless something terrible has happened. My first thought was that something had happened to Mark, that his flight had crashed, or his car had wrecked on the way to the airport. I ran downstairs in my pajamas, heart pounding with the specific terror that comes from late-night interruptions. Lisa stood on my porch shaking violently. Her face was streaked with mascara, her usually perfect hair tangled and wild. She wore plaid pajama pants, a Northwestern sweatshirt, and a winter coat thrown over everything. No shoes, just thick socks that were wet from the lawn. Her mouth opened and closed several times before any sound emerged. I pulled her inside immediately, my concern overriding confusion. She was freezing her hands like ice when I grasped them. I guided her to the couch, grabbed the throw blanket my mother had crocheted, and wrapped it around her shoulders. The whole time she kept shaking her head, mumbling apologies that didn't make sense. I offered to make tea, call someone, drive her to the hospital if she was hurt. She just kept saying no, no, no. Finally, she looked directly at me. Her eyes were red and swollen, filled with a combination of guilt and pity that made my stomach drop. She took a shuddering breath and said the words that would divide my life into before and after. "Your husband is at my house." The sentence hung between us, incomplete, but already devastating. I waited, knowing more was coming, hoping desperately that the next words would provide innocent context. Mark had showed up at her door 2 hours ago. He was drunk, more drunk than she'd ever seen him. His words were slurred, but his intention was clear. He loved her, had loved her for months, couldn't pretend anymore. He wanted to leave me, start fresh with her, build the life they'd been planning in secret. Lisa's voice broke as she recounted his rambling declaration, how he'd pushed past her into the house like he belonged there. I heard myself ask where Mark was supposed to be. The question came out calm, detached, like I was inquiring about the weather. Lisa confirmed what I already knew. There was no Detroit trip, no emergency client meeting. He'd been staying at hotels downtown when he told me he was traveling, creating elaborate alibis for time spent with her. Tonight he decided he was done pretending. The affair had started in September, right after he'd fixed her lawnmower. That beer on her deck had turned into dinner, which turned into kissing in her kitchen while I was at book club. Lisa thought I knew, honestly believed Mark, when he said we had an arrangement, an open marriage we didn't discuss publicly. He'd been so convincing, showing her texts he claimed were from me, giving permission, talking about how modern couples handled things differently. She pulled out her phone with trembling hands, showing me their message thread. Hundreds of texts dating back months. "Good morning, beautiful. Can't stop thinking about last night. Counting minutes until Thursday." My vision blurred, but I kept scrolling, seeing photos from restaurants I recognized, selfies from hotel rooms, screenshots of flight confirmations to places Mark had never mentioned visiting. The Thursday night dates I'd held sacred were their nights now. Mark would leave me at 7 claiming client dinners and go straight to Lisa's. They had their own restaurants, their own songs, their own rituals. While I sat at home catching up on work or reading, proud of being an understanding wife who gave her husband space, they were building a parallel relationship 3 houses away. I found myself laughing a sound that startled both of us. The jewelry receipts I'd found in his jacket last month, the ones he said were corporate gifts for female clients, those were for Lisa. The earrings she was wearing right now, delicate gold drops with tiny diamonds, were supposedly for his mother's birthday. The irony that I'd helped him pick them out suggested the diamonds would be more meaningful than plain gold was grotesque. Lisa's guilt was destroying her. She explained how Mark had pursued her relentlessly, how he'd made their relationship feel inevitable fated. He told her about our supposed problems, how we were essentially roommates staying together for financial reasons, until the divorce papers were finalized. He'd even shown her fake emails from a lawyer documents that looked official enough to be believable. She'd fallen for all of it because she'd wanted to believe it was real. The business trips were their romantic getaways. Every quarterly review in Detroit was actually a weekend in Michigan wine country. The Milwaukee conferences were trips to Door County. Indianapolis was Nashville, where they'd gone to honky-tonks and pretended to be newlyweds. He'd used our joint credit card rewards points, the ones we'd been saving for Maui, to fund their adventures. The violation of that detail hit harder than it should have. October's trip had been special, Lisa said, her voice getting smaller. That was when Mark had told her he loved her, promised to leave me after the holidays. He didn't want to ruin my Christmas. He'd claimed wanted to give me one last happy season before breaking the news gently. Lisa had believed she was being patient, respectful, even waiting for him to handle things properly. She'd been planning their future while I planned our anniversary trip. Tonight, Mark had arrived with a bottle of champagne and news that he'd finally told me everything. He was free, they could stop hiding, could finally be together publicly. When Lisa expressed surprise that I'd taken it so well, he'd laughed and said I'd probably been relieved that I'd been having my own affair with someone from my gym. The casualness of the lie, the easy destruction of my character, had been Lisa's first real red flag. She'd challenged him, asked for details about this supposed confession. His story fell apart quickly. He couldn't remember what I'd said, how I'd reacted, what we'd agreed about the house. When she'd suggested calling me to make sure I was okay, he'd exploded, accused her of not trusting him, of ruining their celebration. That's when he'd started drinking heavily bourbon straight from the bottle he'd brought for their imaginary celebration. The truth had come out in pieces as he got drunker. He hadn't told me anything. He never planned to leave me. I was the safe choice, the stable one, the wife who kept his life organized, while Lisa was the excitement, the escape, the fantasy. He loved us both in different ways. He'd slurred, didn't see why he had to choose. Men throughout history had maintained multiple relationships. He was just born in the wrong era. Lisa had tried to make him leave, but he'd refused, saying her house felt more like home than ours ever had. He'd passed out on her couch around 11, and she'd sat there for an hour staring at this stranger wearing my husband's face. Everything she'd believed about their relationship, about herself, about her judgment, had crumbled. The only thing she could think to do was tell me the truth. I deserved to know. The room felt airless as I processed everything. My husband of 7 years, the man I'd built a life with, was unconscious on another woman's couch, after confessing to an elaborate deception that had apparently been easy for him to maintain. The Thursday date nights I'd protected were a joke. The business success I'd been so proud of was partially fabricated. The marriage I thought was solid was actually hollow. But the strangest part was the calm I felt. Not shock, not rage, just a cool clarity that seemed to come from somewhere outside my body. I stood up, straightened my pajamas, and asked Lisa to show me. She hesitated, warned me it would hurt to see, but I insisted. I needed to witness the truth with my own eyes, needed the image burned into my memory so I could never rationalize it away later. The walk to Lisa's house was surreal. The street I'd walked hundreds of times looked different. At midnight, streetlights creating pools of yellow that didn't quite connect. Lisa's front door was still open, warm air spilling out into the December night. I could see straight through to her living room, where Mark's feet were visible hanging off the couch. His expensive leather shoes, the ones I'd bought him for his birthday, were placed neatly by the door. Entering Lisa's home felt like stepping into an alternate universe, where my life had been redecorated. There were photos on the mantle I recognized from Mark's phone pictures he'd claimed were from client events. Him in a suit at what was supposedly a conference in Detroit, but was actually a jazz club in Chicago. Lisa cropped out, but her hand visible on his shoulder. The two of them at a farmer's market laughing over something at a produce stand. Mark cooking in this kitchen wearing the apron I'd bought him last Christmas. He was sprawled across Lisa's gray sectional, one arm thrown over his eyes, the other dangling to the floor. His shirt was partially unbuttoned, revealing the chest I'd run my fingers across that very morning when we'd made love before his supposed flight. His wedding ring sat on the coffee table next to an empty tumbler, and his phone. The casualness of the ring's removal, like he'd done it countless times before, made bile rise in my throat. I picked up his phone knowing his passcode because we'd never had secrets. Or so I'd thought. The messages were all there, poorly hidden in a folder labeled Work Archives. Hundreds of conversations with Lisa, but also others. 3 other women he'd been texting, nothing as serious as Lisa, but clear attempts at cultivation. Jennifer from the gym got good morning texts. Sandra from his office received compliments on her presentations that had nothing to do with work. Amy, someone I didn't recognize, got late-night messages about how she deserved better than her boyfriend. The credit card statements in his email revealed the full scope. There was indeed a secret card, but it wasn't just for Lisa. Dinners at restaurants I'd suggested we try together, but he'd claimed looked boring. Charges at hotels during lunch hours, the kind of transaction that didn't need explanation. Online purchases for lingerie sites, amounts that suggested multiple recipients. A subscription to a dating app premium service active for 8 months. His work calendar still showed the fictional meetings. Quarterly Review Detroit blocked out for 3 days next week. Strategic Planning Milwaukee for the following month. Emergency Client Meeting Indianapolis recurring monthly. He'd built an entire infrastructure of deception complete with fake confirmations sent to himself out of office messages, and even dummy expense reports to make it look legitimate. I found our anniversary trip confirmation in his deleted emails. He'd canceled it 2 weeks ago, gotten a partial refund that went into his private account. The Maui hotel room I'd spent hours choosing was already released. The first-class seats we'd saved 3 years for were gone. He'd known for 2 weeks that we wouldn't be going, but had let me continue planning, continue excitedly packing, continue believing we were about to reconnect. Lisa stood in the doorway watching me discover everything. She'd started crying again, silent tears that she didn't bother wiping away. She showed me more evidence on her phone, their shared calendar, where he'd logged their dates, photos from trips, videos I didn't want to see, but forced myself to witness. The Mark in those images looked happier than I'd seen him in years, younger, more alive. It was devastating and clarifying simultaneously. The jewelry she wore told another story. Besides the earrings meant for his mother, there was a necklace he'd given her for her birthday, the exact one I'd shown him months ago, saying I'd love it for Christmas. A bracelet from their Nashville trip that matched one in my jewelry box, except mine was clearly the cheaper version. Even in his gifts, I'd become the afterthought, the one who got the knockoff while she got the real thing. Mark stirred on the couch, mumbling something that sounded like my name, then Lisa's, then nothing intelligible. Even unconscious, he was trying to balance both worlds. I stood over him, studying the stranger who wore my husband's face. The laugh lines I'd traced with my fingers were from jokes I hadn't heard. The new muscles from his gym obsession were for someone else's appreciation. The cologne I'd smelled this morning was chosen for another woman's preference. His phone buzzed with a text from Jennifer at the gym. "Missed you in class today, everything okay?" Followed by a winking emoji, another buzz this time from his mother. "Did you tell Jenna yet I have the apartment listings you asked for?" My mother-in-law, who'd eaten at my table 4 days ago, who'd complimented my cooking and thanked me for taking care of her son, had been helping him leave me. The betrayal multiplied, spreading like spilled wine across white carpet. Lisa's laptop was open on the kitchen counter, showing apartment listings in Lincoln Park. Mark had been searching for places, sending her links with comments about which neighborhoods would be best for them. One message said, "This one has the office space you need and is close to that coffee shop you love." He knew her coffee shop. He was planning a future. Just not with me. I photographed everything with my phone. Every message, every receipt, every piece of evidence. Not from emotion, but from practicality. My lawyer would need documentation. That thought surprised me with its clarity. I was already thinking about lawyers already moving past grief to strategy. Some part of me had been preparing for this without realizing it. Those dismissed red flags creating a subconscious exit plan. Mark's jacket hung on Lisa's coat rack like it belonged there. In the pockets, I found receipts from today. Lunch at the Peninsula Hotel, $200. A stop at a florist, $60 for roses that weren't in my house. A jewelry store receipt for a consultation about engagement rings. He was pricing engagement rings while still wearing his wedding band, shopping for a future with Lisa, while maintaining his present with me. The business card in his wallet was for a divorce attorney. The same attorney his golf buddy had used last year for what Mark had called an ugly but necessary split. There were notes on the back in his handwriting about asset protection, spousal support limits, and something underlined twice about establishing separate residence first. He'd been planning this for months, consulting professionals, strategizing his exit while I planned our anniversary trip. Lisa had disappeared into her bedroom, returning with an envelope. Inside were printed emails between Mark and someone named Derek about a business opportunity in San Francisco. They were planning to launch their own consulting firm, had investors lined up, were targeting a spring launch. Finally going to be my own boss, Mark had written. Just need to handle the divorce without Jenna taking half of everything. I was the divorce to be handled, the obstacle to overcome. The final insult was a draft email on his phone to me dated 3 weeks from now. Jenna, we need to talk about our future. I think we both know things haven't been working. It went on to list problems in our marriage I didn't know existed, citing my work obsession, our lack of intimacy growing apart naturally. It was beautifully crafted fiction designed to make our split seem mutual, inevitable, almost friendly. He'd even included a line about always caring for me and wanting us both to find happiness. I sat down hard on Lisa's kitchen stool, the same one where Mark had apparently sat many mornings drinking coffee and reading news on his iPad, just like at our house. She'd created a duplicate of his life here, down to his preferred coffee mug and the specific creamer he liked. The attention to detail was impressive and heartbreaking. She'd studied him, learned him, built a world where he could exist without me even knowing. Mark woke suddenly confused and immediately defensive. His eyes found me first widened with shock, then narrowed with calculation. I watched him construct lies in real time, could actually see him sorting through options before landing on righteous indignation. How dare I follow him, spy on him, invade Lisa's privacy? The attempt at gaslighting was so transparent it was almost insulting. Lisa found her voice then stronger than before. She told him to stop, that she'd invited me, that his lies were finished. The look he gave her was pure venom, the mask dropping completely. He called her stupid, said she'd ruined everything with her conscience, that they could have been happy if she'd just kept her mouth shut. The man speaking wasn't anyone I recognized, certainly not the one who'd cried at our wedding. He tried a different approach with me, switching to remorse so quickly it gave me whiplash. He was confused, had been drinking, didn't mean any of what he'd said. Lisa was obsessed with him, had been pursuing him, he'd just been being neighborly. The lies were so blatant that even he seemed to realize they weren't landing. His shoulders sagged, and for a moment I saw genuine fear in his eyes. The real Mark emerged, then the one neither of us had fully seen. He was tired of pretending, he said. Tired of being the perfect husband, the successful professional, the good son. Did we have any idea how exhausting it was to maintain everyone's expectations? He'd never wanted marriage. Not really, had just gone along because it was expected. His parents, my parents, society. Everyone pushing him toward a life he'd never chosen. He blamed me for being too perfect, too stable, too predictable. I'd made it impossible for him to leave honorably, because I'd never done anything wrong. No affairs, no drama, no justification for divorce. So he'd created his own escape route, found someone who made him feel alive again. But even that had become a cage, because Lisa wanted commitment too, wanted the very thing he was trying to escape. The business trips were the only time he felt free, he said. Not because of Lisa or anyone else, but because he could be nobody answering to no one. He'd spent most of those trips alone, actually walking cities where nobody knew him, sitting in bars, creating fictional backstories for himself. The affairs were just symptoms of a larger disease, the disease of living a life that looked perfect from the outside, but felt like suffocation from within. Lisa laughed, then bitter and sharp. She'd been nothing but another performance, she realized. Another role for him to play the passionate lover, the future partner, the man who'd finally found his soulmate. He'd been as fake with her as he was with me, perhaps more so because she'd believed she was getting the real version. The elaborate lies about our open marriage, the staged evidence, the careful cultivation of their relationship. It was all just another chess game. His mother had known everything because he'd needed someone to confide in, he claimed. She'd been helping him find an apartment, not because she supported the affair, but because she thought separation might help him figure out what he actually wanted. The fact that she'd sat at my table knowing this had hugged me goodbye, while hiding the secret made her complicit in a way that felt almost worse than his betrayal. He turned cruel when he realized neither of us was buying his performance. I was boring in bed, he announced had been since year 2 of marriage. Lisa was clingy and desperate, would believe anything if it came with attention. We were both so pathetic in our different ways. Couldn't I see that he was doing us a favor, showing us we deserved better than someone who had to fake every moment of affection? The pregnancy scare with Lisa had been his wake-up call. The thought of being trapped by a baby had sent him into such a panic that he'd actually made a vasectomy appointment, then canceled it when she got her period. He didn't want children with anyone, had been lying every time we discussed starting a family next year. The fertility tracking app on my phone, the ovulation tests in our bathroom, the prenatal vitamins I'd started taking, all of it was pointless. He stood up, then swaying slightly, but finding his balance. He was leaving, he announced, not with either of us, but alone. He'd already rented a studio downtown, had been moving his important things there gradually. The golf clubs I thought were in our garage were there. His grandfather's watch, the one I thought was being repaired, was there. Half of his clothes, the ones I assumed were at the dry cleaner, were there. He'd been disappearing from our life incrementally so slowly, I hadn't noticed. The partnership at work was real, but it came with a transfer option to London he'd already accepted. He was leaving in January, had been learning British financial regulations for months. Those business books on his nightstand weren't for professional development here, but for his new life there. He'd been planning this escape for over a year, long before Lisa, maybe even before the affairs started. I asked about our 12 years together. Had any of it been real? He considered the question seriously, maybe the first honest moment of the night. The beginning was real, he admitted. The first 2 years, maybe 3. But somewhere around year 4, he'd realized he'd made a mistake. Not because of me, but because of him. He wasn't built for monogamy, for mortgages, for the life we'd constructed. But by then, leaving felt harder than staying until it didn't. Lisa asked if he'd ever loved her. His silence was the answer. He'd loved the idea of her, the escape she represented, the way she looked at him, like he was someone new and exciting. But love, the kind that makes you want to wake up next to someone for 50 years, he didn't think he was capable of that. Had been performing it for so long, he'd forgotten it was supposed to be real. He gathered his things methodically. Phone, wallet, keys, jacket. Put on his shoes, pocketed his wedding ring without putting it back on. He looked at both of us standing there in Lisa's kitchen, 2 women he'd systematically destroyed, and shrugged. "We'd be fine," he said. "We were both strong, smart, capable. We'd recover from this and find men who actually wanted what we were offering." He was doing us a favor, really freeing us to find authentic love. Before leaving, he turned back with what seemed like genuine curiosity. How had we figured it out? When Lisa explained about tonight, about his drunken confession, his face went through several expressions before landing on amusement. His own hubris had been his downfall. If he'd just maintained the performance a few more weeks, he'd have been gone clean. The irony seemed to please him in a perverse way. He walked out of Lisa's house and presumably back to ours. I heard our front door open and close his car starting in the garage. By the time Lisa and I made it outside, his taillights were disappearing down the street. He'd left the garage door open, the kitchen light on, the coffee maker programmed for tomorrow morning, like he was coming back. The normalcy of those details against what had just happened was surreal. I stood in my driveway at 2 in the morning, looking at my house like it was a crime scene. Every window held memories that were now contaminated. Lisa stood beside me, both of us unsure what came next. She apologized again, but I told her to stop. She was a victim too, maybe more so because she'd believed in the possibility of a future, while I at least had a past, even if it was partially fictional. Inside my house, I moved with purpose. First, I called my friend Rachel, a divorce attorney who'd handled my sister's split 2 years ago. She answered on the third ring alert despite the hour and listened without interrupting. She'd be at my house at 7 with paperwork and a plan. Her immediate advice document, everything change passwords, secure finances. The mechanics of ending a marriage were surprisingly straightforward. Next came the money. Our joint checking, savings, and investment accounts were all accessible online. I transferred exactly half of everything into my personal account, the one I'd kept from before marriage for my own earnings. Mark would probably rage about it later, but it was legally my right. I took screenshots of every transaction, every balance, every asset we'd accumulated. The financial picture was actually better than I'd expected, probably because Mark had been planning his own exit strategy. His office was a revelation. The man who'd always been supposedly transparent had a locked filing cabinet I'd never questioned. The key was in his desk drawer, hidden under old business cards. Inside were documents for the London transfer, the lease for his downtown studio, and ironically, a draft post-nuptial agreement he'd never presented. He'd been planning to ask me to sign away rights to his future earnings, citing the partnership as a reason to protect both of us. I found the business cards for 3 different divorce attorneys, notes from consultations dating back 6 months. One had a sticky note saying, "Too aggressive might trigger suspicion." Another said, "Possible but expensive." The third, the one he'd apparently chosen, had "Perfect start after holidays" written beside it. He'd interviewed lawyers like he was hiring for his firm, finding the right one to minimize damage to his assets. The Christmas presents I'd wrapped for him sat under our tree looking absurd now. The watch, the cashmere sweater, the first edition Hemingway I'd found at an estate sale. I gathered them up along with everything else that was his and started placing them in boxes, not frantically or emotionally, but methodically. Books from shelves, clothes from closets, toiletries from bathrooms. 12 years being sorted into cardboard boxes from the garage. At 4 in the morning, my sister arrived without my calling her. Rachel had contacted her knowing I'd need support. Catherine took one look at me and pulled me into a hug that finally broke the dam. I sobbed into her shoulder, not prettily, but with the ugly body-shaking grief that comes from losing something you didn't even realize was already gone. She held me through it, then helped me continue packing his things. By sunrise, everything of Mark's was in boxes in the garage. Catherine had called a locksmith who arrived at 6, changing every lock and providing new keys. The security system password was changed, the garage door code updated. Mark's home office became a storage room for his boxes. The house already felt different, lighter somehow, like it had been holding its breath and could finally exhale. Rachel arrived with coffee and battle plans. She'd already started paperwork, filed emergency motions, set things in motion that couldn't be undone. Illinois was an equitable distribution state, she explained, and Mark's documented deception would work in my favor. The evidence I'd collected was damning, especially the emails about hiding assets and the proof of planning to leave. We had him, she said with satisfaction, that made me trust her completely. My phone had been silent all night, but at 8 it exploded. Mark had discovered the financial transfers and was furious. The text progressed from angry to threatening to pleading to philosophical. I didn't respond to any of them, following Rachel's advice to let him spiral alone. Every message was evidence of his instability, his narcissism, his complete inability to take responsibility. His mother called next, trying to mediate. She was sorry I'd found out this way, but surely we could work through it. Marriage was about forgiveness, growth, working through challenges together. When I told her about the multiple affairs, the London job, the secret apartment, she went quiet. When I mentioned she'd been helping him, she tried to deny it, then justify it, then finally admitted she'd thought tough love might save our marriage. By noon, word had spread. Friends called, some supportive, others fishing for gossip. Mark's colleagues reached out, most genuinely shocked, a few admitting they'd suspected something. The neighbors noticed his car missing the boxes visible through the garage windows. The suburban gossip mill started churning, but I found I didn't care. Let them talk. The truth was more interesting than anything they could invent. Lisa texted around 2, asking if I was okay, and if I wanted to talk. I surprised myself by saying yes. She came over with wine and her own collection of evidence. We sat at my kitchen table, the same one where Mark and I had shared thousands of meals and compared notes. The overlap in his lies was fascinating, the differences revealing. He'd created unique fantasies for each of us, customized deceptions based on what we wanted to hear. She'd already told him never to contact her again, had blocked him on everything, was considering a restraining order after some of his middle-of-the-night texts. She showed me messages where he oscillated between begging for forgiveness and calling her names I won't repeat. The man texting her bore no resemblance to either version of Mark we'd known. Maybe this was the real him finally uncovered. My work had been understanding when I called in sick. My boss Helena said to take whatever time I needed. My team could handle the current projects, and mental health was more important than any campaign. The kindness from unexpected corners was overwhelming. The barista at my regular coffee shop, who'd seen us together every weekend, gave me a free latte and a hug. The elderly couple across the street brought over a casserole and shared their own story of surviving infidelity 40 years ago. Mark's father called that evening, the first time we'd spoken one-on-one in years. He was disgusted with his son apologized for raising someone capable of such deception. He'd been through something similar with Mark's mother decades ago, he admitted, though they'd worked through it. But what Mark had done, this was beyond repair. He wanted me to know I'd always be family to him, regardless of what happened next. The partner at Mark's firm who'd been his mentor reached out professionally, but personally. There were things he couldn't say directly, but he wanted me to know that Mark's transfer to London was no longer guaranteed. Actions have consequences, he said carefully, and the firm valued integrity above all else. Reading between the lines, Mark's professional reputation was about to take a hit that might follow him across the Atlantic. The divorce papers were served at Mark's office 3 days later. Rachel had moved fast, citing adultery, financial deception, and abandonment. The security footage of him leaving with packed bags at 2 in the morning, which our doorbell camera had captured, supported the abandonment claim. His colleagues watched him get served in the conference room, his carefully constructed professional image crumbling in real time. He tried to come to the house that night, discovering the changed locks when his key didn't work. He stood on the porch for an hour, alternating between ringing the doorbell and calling my phone. The neighbors watched from their windows as he eventually gave up. His shoulders slumped in defeat. Mrs. Patterson from next door later told me she'd been prepared to call the police if he'd gotten aggressive. The legal battle was uglier than necessary because Mark couldn't accept losing control. He fought every point, contested every asset, tried to claim I'd been emotionally abusive, and drove him to affairs. Rachel dismantled his arguments systematically, using his own emails and texts against him. The judge, a woman who'd seen too many cases like this, was unmoved by his performance of victimhood. During mediation, Mark brought Lisa up repeatedly, claiming she'd seduced him, that she was the real problem. His lawyer actually looked embarrassed as Mark spiraled, blaming everyone except himself. When he tried to claim I'd hidden assets, Rachel presented his secret bank accounts, the credit cards I hadn't known about, the business valuations he'd tried to hide. His own preparation for leaving became evidence of his deception. I kept the house, which infuriated him. He'd wanted to force a sale split, the equity use his half for the London move. But Rachel argued successfully that his voluntary abandonment and documented plans to leave the country meant he'd forfeited claims to the marital home. The judge agreed, especially after seeing emails where he'd called it Jenna's suburban prison and said he couldn't wait to escape. The retirement accounts were split, though Mark tried to claim his partnership stake shouldn't be included. Rachel had forensic accountants who found discrepancies in his reported income versus actual earnings. He'd been hiding bonuses in cryptocurrency, thinking he was clever. The court didn't see it that way. The final settlement left him with less than he'd have gotten if he'd been honest from the beginning. His London transfer fell through after the divorce filing became public. The international office had strict morality clauses, and a messy divorce with documented infidelity didn't meet their standards. His mentor at the firm suggested a leave of absence to get his affairs in order. Mark interpreted this correctly as being managed out and resigned before they could fire him. His carefully built career imploded in less than 2 months. Lisa filed her own harassment claim after Mark wouldn't stop contacting her. He'd shown up at her house drunk several times, left flowers, with disturbing notes, created fake social media accounts to monitor her. The restraining order was granted immediately. She ended up moving back to Lincoln Park, unable to feel safe in the house where everything had happened. Before leaving, she apologized again, and I told her I hoped she found someone real. The friends divided predictably. Couples who'd known us together mostly sided with me, having witnessed Mark's behavior changes themselves. His golf buddies initially supported him, but distanced themselves when the full story emerged. The book club I'd neglected during his busiest months welcomed me back with wine and rage on my behalf. My sister organized a divorce shower, complete with cake shaped like broken handcuffs. Mark's family imploded alongside our marriage. His mother finally admitted she'd known about previous affairs, had helped him cover for indiscretions throughout our marriage. His father filed for separation from her, feeling betrayed by decades of deception. His sister reached out to apologize, saying she'd suspected, but hadn't known how to tell me. The family gatherings I'd loved became casualties of his choices. Professional consequences followed him. Word spread through Chicago's financial consulting community about his ethics violations. The expense report fraud alone would have been career-ending. But combined with using company resources for affairs and lying to colleagues, he became unemployable at any reputable firm. Last I heard, he was working remotely for a startup, making a fraction of his previous salary. Dating felt impossible at first. The idea of trusting someone new, of being vulnerable again, made me physically sick. But therapy helped, as did time. My therapist, a woman who specialized in betrayal trauma, helped me understand that Mark's deception wasn't about my inadequacy, but his emptiness. No amount of love from me could have filled a void he refused to acknowledge. 6 months after the divorce, I went on my first date. Coffee with someone from my running club, perfectly nice, but no spark. More dates followed, each one practice for remembering who I was outside of being Mark's wife. Some were disasters that became funny stories. Others were pleasant but unremarkable. All of them were honest, which was the only standard that mattered anymore. A year after that midnight knock, my life looked nothing like I'd imagined. The house had been transformed, every room reclaimed and redesigned to reflect only me. The home office became an art studio where I'd rediscovered painting. The basement Mark had claimed for sports memorabilia was now a yoga and meditation space. His closet held my expanding wardrobe, clothes chosen for joy rather than appropriateness. My career had exploded in unexpected ways. Without the constant drain of managing Mark's moods and schedule, I had energy for innovation. I'd pitched and won 3 major accounts, earned a promotion to senior director, and was recruited by 2 competitors. The raise I negotiated was more than Mark and I had made combined. Financial independence felt like freedom I'd never known I was missing. Travel became my healing. I used those saved vacation days for solo adventures. Barcelona, where I ate alone at midnight and felt powerful. Tokyo, where being unable to read signs reminded me I could navigate uncertainty. Iceland, where the northern lights made me cry for beauty rather than pain. Each trip built confidence that I could create joy without anyone else's permission. My friendship with Lisa evolved into something neither of us expected. We met for coffee monthly, bonded by shared experience and mutual respect. She was in therapy too, working through her own patterns of choosing unavailable men. We laughed about Mark's terrible taste in music, his pretentious wine preferences, the way he'd mansplained our own careers to us. Healing happened in those moments of shared recognition. Lisa started dating first a fellow designer who was everything Mark wasn't: honest, consistent, emotionally available. Watching her trust again gave me hope. When she got engaged 18 months after everything exploded, I helped her choose a dress, hosted her bachelorette party, stood as a bridesmaid. Mark's destruction had somehow created a friendship neither of us could have imagined. I met Daniel at a conference in Seattle. He was presenting on sustainable business practices, passionate about environmental responsibility, in ways that made his eyes light up. We talked for hours about everything except relationships. He didn't know my story, had no preconceptions about who I was or what I'd survived. The clean slate felt revolutionary. Our first date lasted 12 hours. Coffee became lunch, became walking through Pike Place Market, became dinner, became drinks, became sitting on his hotel roof, watching the sunrise. He talked about his divorce 5 years prior, with the perspective of someone who'd done the work. When I finally told him about Mark, he listened without trying to fix or minimize. He just witnessed, which was exactly what I needed. Dating Daniel taught me the difference between performance and authenticity. He was consistently himself, anxious about flying, obsessed with documentaries, terrible at cooking, but enthusiastic about trying. He didn't manage his image or maintain facades. When he was tired, he said so. When he was wrong, he apologized. When he was happy, his whole face showed it. The transparency was jarring, then addictive. We took things slowly, both too scarred for rushing. 6 months before exclusive labels, a year before meeting families, 18 months before discussing living together. Every milestone was negotiated, discussed, chosen rather than assumed. We built something intentional with foundations checked and rechecked. The careful construction felt like the opposite of dangerous. His proposal came 2 years after we met on a random Tuesday while making dinner. No grand gestures or public displays, just him saying he couldn't imagine any future without me in it. Would I consider making it official? The ring was his grandmother's reset because he knew I'd want something unique. He'd ask my sister's opinion, my mother's blessing, my friend's advice. The consideration in every detail made me cry. Mark reached out once, 3 years after that midnight. A long email about growth, accountability, and amends. He was in therapy, he claimed, working through his issues. He understood the pain he'd caused and wanted to apologize properly. Could we meet for coffee? The email went straight to trash. Some bridges once burned don't deserve rebuilding, and forgiveness doesn't require proximity. I heard through mutual connections that he'd moved to Austin, was working at another startup, had married someone 23 years old who didn't know his history. His pattern would probably repeat, but that was no longer my concern. My energy went toward building rather than monitoring destruction. The opposite of love wasn't hate, but indifference, and I'd finally achieved it. The neighborhood evolved too. The elderly Pattersons moved to a retirement community, replaced by a young family whose kids drew chalk butterflies on sidewalks. Lisa's house sold to a couple who painted it yellow and planted sunflowers. New stories overrode old ones, the street's memory updating with each moving van. Only I remained, but even I was unrecognizable from the woman who'd lived here before. My mother, who'd initially mourned the loss of Mark as a son-in-law, eventually admitted she'd never fully trusted him. Something about his smile, she said, too practiced, like he was always performing. She was proud of how I'd handled everything, prouder still of who I'd become after. Mothers know, she said, even when they don't say anything. The validation healed something I hadn't known was wounded. The financial freedom from keeping the house and my career growth allowed choices I'd never imagined. I started a scholarship fund for women returning to school after divorce. Small at first, it grew with donations from others who'd survived similar betrayals. The first recipient sent a letter that made me sob. She'd thought her life was over at 45, but education had given her hope. Mark's destruction had indirectly created something beautiful. Therapy revealed patterns I'd never seen. The childhood need to be perfect to earn love through achievement had made me vulnerable to someone like Mark, who'd weaponized those insecurities. Understanding didn't excuse his choices, but helped me recognize why I dismissed red flags. The work was painful, but necessary, excavating wounds to properly heal them. Growth came from discomfort, not despite it. The midnight knock became a marking point in my history. Before Lisa's knock, and after Lisa's knock. The before woman was accomplished but incomplete, successful but not satisfied, partnered but profoundly alone. The after woman was whole, in ways that had nothing to do with relationship status. That knock hadn't ruined my life. It had revealed that my life needed saving. Daniel and I married in my backyard under string lights. My father rehung with the same precision as my first wedding. But everything else was different. Smaller, simpler, truer. No performance, just promise. Lisa was there with her husband, both part of the unlikely family born from destruction. Mark's absence wasn't felt because Mark, the real Mark I'd thought I'd married, had never existed anyway. Sometimes I drive past Lisa's old house and remember that December night. The panic, the disbelief, the strange calm that followed. I think about the woman who opened that door in penguin pajamas, who thought her world was ending. I want to tell her that she's right. That world is ending, but what comes next is so much better. She won't even mourn the loss. The midnight knock wasn't a destruction, but a gift wrapped in the worst paper, but containing freedom. The lessons crystallize slowly. Trust, real trust, requires evidence aligned with words. Love shouldn't require performance or exhausting maintenance. Partners who truly care don't need escape routes or parallel lives. Deception takes enormous energy that honest people use for building. When someone shows you who they are through actions, believe them the first time, not the 100th. But the deepest lesson was about myself. I was stronger than any betrayal, more valuable than anyone's validation complete, without anyone's completion. The life I'd built after destruction was authentically mine, every choice considered, every relationship genuine. Mark had tried to break me with his leaving, but I'd been broken long before by his staying. The midnight knock had simply revealed what was already true. My story became one I shared selectively but powerfully. Women reached out through social media, recognizing themselves in my narrative. Some were considering leaving, others freshly destroyed, many years past, but still processing. The sisterhood of survivors was vast and varied, connected by scars that looked different but hurt the same. We held each other up through virtual support and actual coffee proof that destruction could birth connection. The future stretched ahead, unknown but unafraid. Daniel and I talked about children, travel, building businesses, growing old. But we also maintained independence, separate friends, individual dreams. We were partners, not merged entities. The balance felt sustainable in ways my first marriage never had. Love wasn't absorption, but parallel growth roots intertwined, but branches reaching separately toward light. That midnight knock taught me that devastation could be donation, that bombs could clear ground for better building, that the worst moment might become the turning point toward the best life. Not everyone gets such a clear before and after, such an obvious catalyst for change. In the strangest way, I was grateful for that knock, for Lisa's courage, for Mark's inability to maintain his performance forever. They'd given me the gift of truth, and truth, even painful truth, was where real life began. Looking back now, the signs were everywhere. The small disconnections, the subtle withdrawals, the energy that felt forced. But we see what we're ready to see, understand what we're equipped to handle. I wasn't ready then, but the universe conspired to make me ready through one midnight knock. Sometimes destruction is instruction, teaching us what we couldn't learn any other way. The woman I am now would never have tolerated Mark's deception, would have seen through the performance, trusted the discomfort, asked the hard questions. But I had to become her through surviving him. Growth required failure. Wisdom needed wounds. Strength came from breaking, then rebuilding. The journey from that midnight to this morning was measured in tears, then insights, then decisions, then joy. If you're watching this because you recognize yourself in my story, because you're living with suspicious minds and dismissed red flags, because your Thursday nights feel hollow and your partner's phone holds secrets, know this: the knock is coming. Maybe not literally, maybe not at midnight, but truth always surfaces. The only question is whether you'll answer when it arrives or pretend you didn't hear it ring. And when that moment comes, when your world cracks open, revealing the lies beneath, remember that destruction isn't the end, but the beginning. You'll survive the revelation, navigate the dissolution, rebuild from rubble. You'll discover strength you didn't know existed, create life you couldn't have imagined, become someone your former self would admire. The midnight knock isn't your ending, but your starting gun towards something infinitely better. Have you ever experienced a moment when everything you believed turned out to be false? When someone you trusted completely revealed themselves as a stranger? Share your story in the comments below. Like this video. If it resonated with you, subscribe for more stories of survival and triumph, and share it with anyone who needs to know they're not alone in rebuilding after betrayal. Thank you for listening to my journey from that midnight knock to this morning's joy. And remember, sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the best thing that ever happened for you. Until next time, trust yourself, value your worth, and never apologize for requiring truth in your relationships.